Hello everyone, welcome back to the KMTRADERS channel. So this is the full market analysis volume 133. So we're going to look at the week ahead, what we've got left of it, and also compare our analysis from last week also. So we'll start off with gold. So as you can see, start off this week with 1st of August. So you can see already prices popping up to the upside. With our last week's analysis, we were looking for pretty much the continuation play lower. I was expecting more prices to go lower first before we get this little pop in price. But now what I'm going to be doing is pretty much moving things along, because we can keep this kind of idea here. But what I didn't really look at last week was the idea that price holding from 1680. So that could have been another scenario that I didn't really look at too much in detail, but let's just kind of go on with the idea that where we are from now. So we can see prices just popping up right now. So I'm looking at price possibly turning over from here to the downside. So we could look at something like that. Let me just go ahead and get rid of these two. So we could have that as a scenario. The other one is we could have the opportunity for price to turn around up here and continue to push higher, which I think is still a likely bias for that to happen, and I think that could happen. So obviously we can starting to see price sort of sell off. EMA is kind of curling over, so at 617.80 we're kind of finding some rejection right now. So we could see price turn over to the downside, and then if price is selling off, there is an option where, or there is an ability, or there is the idea that price could pop back up to the upside. So I'm going to be looking at that opportunity for price to turn over, and if it does, we could end up pushing into 1800s, and then from here this is where it's going to be all play move, because if we start to rock it up higher, then we're going to definitely be bullish and completely shift the idea that we probably won't see 1680 be taken out. But my idea is something like this to happen. So yeah, so that can all kind of come together very nicely if this all kind of pans out. Again, very futuristically talking here, but just something that I wanted to kind of just share with you guys, just because this is what I'm thinking. And then the other case here is if price just completely melts, which is part of this scenario, I guess. And then what we could end up seeing happening is something like this. So I think this probably makes sense now if I was to just mark this out as idea 1 and idea 2, which I think will give you a good kind of spectrum of what we could expect. So something like that, and then the rally, which I expect this to be really big, or we'll have this and then we'll have the kind of reaction afterwards, so like that, and then again that really big move higher. So that's what I'm kind of looking at with gold, and then I'm going to keep this over for the next few days and see how it kind of flows. Let's have a look into EU. So with this, we're kind of looking at for price to kind of give us some sort of turnover to the downside, or we were looking at price pushing lower ultimately. I'm seeing price now kind of doing that right now this week, so very start of the week, so first, so pretty much to this upside. So we see this is kind of already played out, or playing out. So I think this option is being or is unfolding, and we think we could head into 0.99, which is quite again history in the making, because obviously the dollar has been 1-to-1 and it's not revisited 1-to-1 since 20 odd years, I believe. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, we can see price turning over to the downside, so that's one scenario. The other one, which I highly doubt it's going to happen, but we could get a rally to the upside. But again, if I see any rejection from 1, it could be a good move towards to the upside. So I'm just going to keep it in mind and not kind of be strictly biased for a sell. But what I want to see happen is basically 0.99 being hit, and then we can probably look at some sort of rejection to kind of recover higher. But again, we don't necessarily know if we're going to get that rejection yet at 0.99, so we'll see where we can go on from that. So if we take a look at NZDUSD, so where are we? The first, so about here. So we can see that the second scenario kind of is playing out. We had kind of like a little pop up to the upside, and then we can see price kind of like turning over. So I'm actually quite happy with that. What I probably will do is just kind of like move things gradually along. So we could potentially expect this overall move to the downside. So whether price rejects 0.63 or it kind of just maybe pushes a little higher, that can also happen. So ultimately I'm just looking out for this, and yeah, pretty much it's going to look like this. So either we'll take out 0.6 and then reject and go higher, or we'll see price push up and then ultimately push lower to the downside. So that's what I'm looking at for NZDUSD. If we take a look at AU, so we can see price is already turning over here. Let's have a look. So yeah, what do we have first of all? So we can see price taking a shot to the upside and then kind of falling back down. So maybe if we get rid of this right now, we can see one or two things happening, which will be either a retest and then the continuation lower, or we'll get price to rally higher, maybe 0.71, and then flush out those sells to take some sellers out. So that's what I'm ideally looking at for that pair. But again, the US dollar pairs are pretty much all kind of similarly in terms of direction are taking place, so we can see kind of some similarities there. So if we go on to now Japanese yen pairs, we should start to see another kind of correlation here. So if we have a look at what we got drawn on from last time, so the 1st of August, so we're looking about here. So what I was expecting was this kind of channel to hold and kind of give us a one more push towards the upside, but that's completely fine now, because I think we're actually more or less now going to be pivoting to a new direction, and I'm mainly going to be looking at for sells at this moment in time. While we've been pushing up and pushing up, I think this could be now the kind of moment where we are where we're going to be looking for sells. As we know, price for UJ has just been consistently pushing, so this is where this scenario had come in place, but not necessarily had an opportunity to get a retest. So maybe we could get a retest this week, and I think this is the most important part of like this point, is when price is rapidly moving one direction. It's you're not necessarily going to get a retest straight away. It might take several days or weeks for it to come back up. So I'm going to use 140 as a kind of barrier. So ultimately 139, I guess, actually 139 as that kind of like resistance now. So basically if we go above this, I'm now going to be looking at buys, but for now I'm going to be consistently looking at some sells. So that doesn't mean we can't look at buys, it just means we might have to scale in a little bit, because we've got about 300 pips, depending on how much this can move up, obviously higher. So if we were looking at buys, we'd have to look at something like that. But I'm not going to draw that in, because mainly I'm just going to focus on the overall direction, just to make it a little bit easier for you guys. I don't want to confuse you too much, but that's what I'm looking at. Basically some sell-off in price, whether it's right now or whether it's whether price starts to sell off right now, because there's a nice rejection candle there. Just curious and to see if that holds off, but you know, maybe something like that, and it just folds off now and just takes out 130, 129. But again, all to play for. So that's what I'm looking at with UJ. If we take a look now into CJ, so my idea is that we are potentially looking now for a changeover in price. So as I was kind of mentioning before, with last time, I wanted this kind of channel to hold, and as you can see, we broke out at the bottom, so 102 now. So I will actually go ahead and get rid of this and start to look at now some new shifts, some new trend shifts. So I'm using 107 or 108, probably 108 I'd say, as our resistance now. We can go ahead and get rid of this. So what I'm going to be looking in for now is pretty much this idea that price could sell off and then do something like this, which I think will be a huge drop in price. Like, let's have a look at the pip count on this one. So maybe if it rejects at 106 to the down, 500 plus pips. Oh, again, holding it is obviously another story in itself. But you need to obviously just be mindful of, you know, what kind of targets you're looking at. But I'm going to try and see if we can go, go to 100 and push lower. Ideally, that's what I'm kind of going to be looking for anyway. So as long as price stays below 108, I think we could drop off in price. I'm liking the way that price is rapidly pushing, but equally, I'm looking at how price is eagerly moving higher. So again, I think we could have some sort of sell-off in price. I think it is worth having that bias, even though the recovery is quite fast-paced. So at the same breath, you could look at potential buys, but again, it is completely up to you. Let's have a look at that one actually, because obviously, if price is already pushing up high and you grab into it, it's still a good amount of pips, and then if it does push up, you're going to be in a good position. So you could look at buying now and then look to sell if that opportunity comes, because you don't really know if there is a sell going to happen, right? So that's just kind of my 2 cents on that pair. So if you take a look at EJ, so what was we looking at last time? So I believe we were looking at something like this. So I believe price may have been here, and then price has dropped so very nicely here. So basically it was this scenario, I'd say. I can't necessarily remember what I completely drew in, but I remember that I was looking for sells ultimately. So let's take a look now and try and reassess the situation, see if we can like jump back in on this. Okay, so ultimately I think we are pushing lower now, mainly for the fact that, you know, we've been just, you know, consistently pushing down. I like that bar there. I'm just gonna see if we can, you know, continue to push those. So I'm not necessarily looking for buys, even though it is possible that we could. So again, just to keep it easy while there's only a few days left of this week, we could expect price to push up a little bit more, or we could have rejection at 136 depending on how this candle closes. We could see price drop into 133, so maybe even take out 132, maybe even stepping into 130s, but that's the ultimate direction really. I probably will need to see what price is going to happen over the next 3 to 4 days, but we'll see. Okay, so with AJ, let's take a look. So this one I'm kind of like in two minds, right? So with this, I'm thinking at 90, that because I'm looking at this kind of area here. So basically 90, 89, or let's call it 89 actually. Looks a bit right. So multiple rejections here. I'm going to use this as a support. So essentially what I'm saying is, if we break below this, it's going to be a sell. But as long as that's not, as long as that's kind of been there, I want to look for potential sells again, this is going to be very tricky here because we're already pushing up quite aggressively. So we could look for sells into this and aggressively look into expecting this to break, or we could wait for this thing to happen, which is pretty much a push move to the upside. So it kind of goes against all of the Japanese yen pairs, which is why looking at the other pairs for correlation kind of helps you make a decision overall. But I can potentially see the 98 being taken out, possibly, or 97 rather, because it's closer to price action. So 97, you know, we can look out for price to potentially tap above that, and then from here we need to wait for some sort of rejection. But for now, just as a TP target, you could just look at 97 for a buy if we're able to. But as long as basically 89 holds and 88 holds, I think we could be looking at some buys. But if it breaks, we're going to be looking at that, and I will be convinced to be dropping lower. So if out of the Japanese yen pairs, AJ is probably the one that's kind of like a bit iffy right now. So we'll just have to kind of review that maybe over the next few days. I think the Aussies, the AUD pairs, and the New Zealand dollars does have some news tonight, maybe or maybe throughout the week. I'm not necessarily sure, but yeah. So let's take a look at USD Swiss franc. So with this one, I'm actually looking at it very differently now. There is this idea that we could progress higher, so I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind, but I'm actually looking for the ability for price to drop off, and maybe it could drop once more to the downside. But seeing as price is, you know, been consistently bouncing 3 times, this could be a channel in disguise, like so. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. Oops. So if I was to paste this over here and do it possibly to this one or to this one, you could do it there, doesn't really matter, but it just kind of gives you a guideline. Basically, this is just to say that if price goes above this, it's more than likely that it's going to break up higher, which is not a key. It's not that you use this to wait for price to get here and then buy. It's more so just for, you know, just the general directional bias, in my opinion. So you can use it as like a kind of framework. So as price is on the downside of a channel, your idea is, you know, you pretty much want to be looking for buys, and it's much more higher probable. And if you're on the upside here, you wouldn't really be looking for sells. Buys. You'd possibly be looking for sells, but again, if the momentum is pushing it higher, it makes sense to buy. So that's kind of like the outlook that I'm possibly thinking of for USD Swiss. And then if we finally look into USDCAD, I've got this idea forming. So we were looking at price to potentially swivel up to the upside. I kind of still think that can happen, maybe a little bit differently. So maybe something like this and then drop, or it really depends if that's gonna happen. Again, we don't know what's gonna happen here, but I want something. I think price could reject here based on the fact that we've had some strong manipulations here in price. So we could get that to flow. The other thing is, what else was I thinking? The other one is this, where we get price to just rally to the upside. Up here. So this low could hold, so 127 or 128, and then we could see price rally. And then again, we're not sure if we're going to find a rejection at 1.3 or 1.31, or if we're going to rally and push higher. So not necessarily sure just yet, but this is the kind of outline and the areas that I'm kind of looking at. So again, if you did get any value from this video, make sure you leave it a like. Again, a little late with the timing on the video, but just a little bit caught up with a few things, but nonetheless, I'm trying to just give a bit more of a forecast, so it kind of like relays and overlays into the next week. But hopefully I should be back on time with my uploads. But yeah, If you did, like I said, if you did get any value from this, make sure you leave it a like. If you haven't done so already, make sure you're subscribed, and thank you all for listening, and we shall see you next week.